The universe is governed by two brutal laws: scarcity and motion. Scarcity means there is never enough. Not enough space, not enough resources. This is the birth of greed, the engine of competition. Motion is the cycle of development, destruction, and rebirth. Everything flows, everything changes. But here is the truth they hide. Peace is not the absence of war. Peace is merely the period where we gather enough friction to ignite the next conflict. They are two halves of the same cage. We think we've escaped the chains of feudalism, but the system only changed its skin. Capitalism and socialism, they aren't enemies. They are a binary code, two sides of a coin designed to keep each other alive while you remain the fuel. You're told you're free, yet you're trapped in a loop of debt and a race you can never win. Welcome to the invisible driver, where there are truths that society doesn't want you to know. Look at the world around you. We've been conditioned to believe that if you work hard, follow the rules, and contribute to the machine will take care of you. But look at the math. The reality is far colder. The universe operates on two brutal, non-negotiable principles: scarcity and motion. Think of it as a global game of musical chairs. When there are 10 players and 10 chairs, everyone is happy. That is the illusion of peace. But in our world, the resources, the chairs, are finite. Space is finite. Prime land is finite. Yet the number of players is constantly growing, and the music, it never stops. In the 1970s, the American dream was built on a different geometry. One income could buy a house, a car, and a future for a family of 4. Back then, there were enough chairs for everyone. But as the population exploded and resources were consolidated, the geometry shifted. Today, you are told to run faster, work longer, and hustle harder. But no one tells you that they are pulling the chairs away while you're still running. This is the birth of the survival instinct. When resources are scarce, competition isn't a choice. It's a biological necessity. It breeds greed, it breeds shadows, and eventually, it breeds war. We are taught that conflict is a mistake of history, but in a world of scarcity, conflict is the system's way of resetting the density. It's the cycle of destruction and rebirth. Here is the hard lesson. You aren't losing because you're lazy. You're losing because you're playing a game where the rules of physics are stacked against you from the moment you take your first breath. You are fighting for crumbs in a room where the walls are slowly closing in. But if the game is rigged by the very laws of the universe, how do a select few always seem to find a seat before the music even starts? How do they stay ahead of the motion? It's not just luck. It's because they've mastered a force more powerful than effort. A force I call the gravity of wealth. And to understand how they use it to pull the world toward them, we have to look at the first great barrier of the matrix: the Matthew effect. The Bible calls it the Matthew effect. For to everyone who has, more will be given, but from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. In the world of finance, this isn't just a verse, it is the law of the gravity of wealth. Think about how gravity works. The more mass an object has, the stronger its pull. Wealth operates exactly the same way. When a corporation or an individual reaches a certain mass of capital, they stop being a competitor and start becoming a black hole. Take a look at your local Main Street. 20 years ago, it was filled with mom and pop shops, families who built wealth over generations. Then came the giants. A company like Amazon or Walmart doesn't just compete with a small business. They rewrite the physics of the market. Because of their sheer mass, they get cheaper shipping, lower interest rates from banks, and enough data to predict what you want before you even know you want it. They can afford to lose money for years just to starve out the small players. This isn't survival of the fittest. It's predatory engineering. The system tells you that if you're smart and you work hard, you can rise to the top. That's the bait. The reality is that the higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes for everyone else. Modern capitalism isn't designed to encourage innovation anymore. It's designed to optimize accumulation. The big don't just win. They consume the very possibility of anyone else winning. Here is your lesson for today. In the Matrix, the middle class is the crop, and the conglomerates are the harvesters. If you are playing the game by the old rules, trying to outwork a machine that owns the data, the logistics, and the politicians, you aren't a player, you're the fuel. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. If the game is this rigged, why hasn't it collapsed yet? How do they keep the lights on while they're stripping the house bare? The answer lies in a secret fountain, a hidden mechanism that steals the value of your sweat before you even get your paycheck. It's a phenomenon that most people have never heard of, but it's the reason why the rich get richer while your dollar buys less every single day. To find the source of this invisible driver, we have to follow the money back to the very moment it is born. We have to understand the Cantillon Effect. Imagine a giant water sprinkler in the middle of a parched field. The grass directly under the nozzle is lush, deep green, and overflowing with life. But as you move toward the edges of the field, the grass turns yellow, then brown, until finally, at the very perimeter, it's nothing but dust. This is the Cantillon Effect, and it is the most sophisticated theft in human history. Most people believe that inflation is just a natural phenomenon, like the weather, where prices just go up. That is a lie. Inflation is a deliberate redistribution of purchasing power. You see, when the Federal Reserve prints trillions of dollars, that money doesn't enter the system all at once. It has a point of origin. The people standing directly under the sprinkler, the big banks, the government contractors, and the ultra-wealthy get that new money first. They get to spend it while prices are still low. They use it to buy up real estate, stocks, and hard assets before the rest of the world even knows the money exists. But by the time that money trickles down to your paycheck, the ripples have already pushed prices through the roof. You receive the money last, when its value has already been hollowed out. You aren't just paying more for eggs and gas. You are paying a silent tax that was harvested by the people at the center of the sprinkler years ago. Take 2020 as a prime example. While the world was locked down, the money printer went into overdrive. The stock market hit all-time highs, and billionaires saw their wealth explode by trillions. Why? Because they were at the source. Meanwhile, the average American waited weeks for a $1,200 check that was instantly devoured by the skyrocketing cost of living. Here is the lesson they don't want you to learn. Your savings aren't a store of value. They are a melting ice cube. If you are trading your time for a currency that is being devalued at the source, you are running on a treadmill that is slowly accelerating toward a wall. The system has mastered the art of stealing your time without ever touching your wallet. But if the reality is this grim, why aren't people taking to the streets? Why is the majority still asleep, content with their struggle? It's because the architects of the Matrix have provided us with just enough distractions to keep the pain bearable. They've replaced the property you should own with pleasures you can consume. To understand how they keep the masses sedated while the house is being robbed, we have to look at the ultimate psychological trap: bread and circuses. In ancient Rome, the emperors had a secret to keeping the masses from rioting while the empire crumbled. They called it panem et circenses, bread and circuses. If you keep the people's bellies full of cheap grain and their minds distracted by the gladiatorial games, they will never look up to see the chains being forged around their ankles. Fast forward 2,000 years. The arena has changed, but the strategy is identical. Why is it that you can buy a high-definition 70-inch television for the price of a few days' work? Why is an iPhone 15 a miracle of technology, available on a monthly payment plan that costs less than a dinner out? It's because these are the circuses of the 21st century. The system makes consumption cheap, easy, and addictive. You are flooded with Netflix, DoorDash, and endless digital entertainment to keep your dopamine levels high while your net worth stays low. But look at the things that actually matter. Look at the bread. Since 1971, the cost of housing, healthcare, and higher education in America has skyrocketed, leaving wages in the dust. The system has made a trade with you. It says, "We will give you the illusion of prosperity. You can have the latest gadgets, you can travel for Instagram photos, and you can eat like a king from a delivery app. In exchange, you will give up your chance to actually own the land you stand on. You will give up your equity, your sovereignty, and your future." This is the comfort trap. It's designed to make you feel rich while you are becoming a permanent renter of your own life. Here is your lesson. If the system makes something easy to consume, it's a distraction. If the system makes something incredibly difficult to own, it's a threat to their power. The elites don't want you to have a mortgage-free home. They want you to have a premium subscription. Because when you own nothing, you are dependent on everything. And we are moving into a new era where this dependency is being turned into a business model. You aren't just losing your assets, you are being demoted to a new kind of servant. To see how deep this rabbit hole goes, we have to look at the death of ownership itself. Welcome to the world of digital serfdom. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. You've heard the phrase. It's been dismissed as a conspiracy theory. But if you open your eyes, you'll realize it's already the standard operating procedure for the modern world. We are witnessing the birth of digital serfdom. In the Middle Ages, a serf lived on land owned by a lord. They worked the soil, they produced the grain, but they owned none of it. They were allowed to stay only as long as they remained useful to the master. Today, the land has been replaced by the cloud, and the lords have been replaced by big tech and institutional investors. Think about your daily life. You don't buy software anymore. You subscribe to it. You don't own your favorite movies or music. You pay for the privilege to access them until a licensing deal expires and they vanish from your library. Even the features in your car, the heated seats, the navigation, are being turned into monthly fees. But the most dangerous frontier of this new feudalism is where you sleep. In the last few years, massive investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard have been outbidding families for single-family homes across America. They aren't buying these houses to sell them. They are buying them to turn the American dream into a permanent rental market. They want to be your landlord, your utility provider, and your banker all at once. When you own an asset, you have a stake in the future. You have leverage. But when you only rent your life, you are a vassal. You are one missed payment or one terms of service violation away from having your entire existence deleted or your door locked. Here is the lesson. The system is moving away from selling you products and moving towards selling you permission. Permission to work, permission to drive, permission to live. They want to replace the solid ground of ownership with the shifting sands of a subscription.
Why? Because an owner is hard to control. A renter is easy to manipulate. But there is a deeper layer to this cage. To keep this system of access without ownership running, they need a way to keep you working for things that disappear the moment you stop paying. They need to turn your very time into a liquid that they can drain. To understand how they harvest your life force, we have to look at the invisible chains that bind your future before it even happens. We have to look at the alchemy of debt. Most people think of debt as a financial tool, a way to buy things now and pay for them later. But if you look through the lens of the Matrix, you'll see debt for what it truly is: the alchemy of time theft. Money, in its purest form, is just a battery for human effort. You work for an hour, you store that effort in $1, and you spend it later. But the system has inverted this. Through the alchemy of modern banking, they have figured out how to spend your future effort before you've even lived it. Think about the average American initiation ritual, the student loan. At 18 years old, before you even understand how the world works, the system hands you a pen and asks you to sign away your 30s and 40s. You aren't just borrowing capital, you are selling your future sovereignty. You are shackling your most productive years to a balance sheet that was created out of thin air by a bank's keyboard. This is the cycle of motion we discussed earlier. The system requires you to keep moving, keep working, and keep consuming, not because it benefits you, but because you have to service the debt. A man with a 30-year mortgage and a car payment isn't a free citizen. He is a high-functioning servant who cannot afford to stop, cannot afford to dissent, and certainly cannot afford to exit. The Federal Reserve and the global banking cartels don't need to put physical chains on your or me. Why would they? Physical slaves have to be fed and housed by their masters. Debt slaves house and feed themselves, and they do it with a smile, believing they are building credit. Here is the lesson. Every dollar you owe is an hour of your life that no longer belongs to you. Debt is the gravity that keeps you pinned to the floor of the matrix, while the architects float above on the value you create. But as the weight of this debt grows, it begins to do something dangerous to the entire planet. It doesn't just crush the individual, it starts to clog the very veins of civilization. The money is being pumped out, but it's not reaching the organs. The system is beginning to experience a lethal blockage. To understand why the global economy feels like it's on the verge of a heart attack, we have to look at the stagnation of the flow. We have to look at the blood clot. For an economy to be alive, money must move. It is the blood of civilization. In a healthy body, the heart pumps blood to the furthest extremities, to the fingers and the toes, nourishing every cell. But in our modern world, we are witnessing a lethal phenomenon. The blood is being pumped out of the heart, but it is getting stuck at the top. This is the blood clot. According to recent data, the top 1% of the global population now owns more wealth than the bottom 99% combined. But here is the problem that the economists won't tell you on the news. A billionaire, no matter how rich, can only eat 3 meals a day. They can't wear 1,000 suits at once, and they can't drive 500 cars at the same time. When wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, it stops moving. It sits in offshore accounts, in massive stock portfolios, and in dead assets. In economics, we call this the velocity of money. When $100 is in the pocket of a working-class mother, that money moves. She buys groceries. The grocer pays the delivery driver.
The driver buys gas, and the gas station owner pays the local plumber. That single $100 bill creates thousands of dollars in economic life as it circulates. But when that same $100 is absorbed into a multi-billion-dollar fund, the circulation stops. The blood freezes. This is why, despite trillions of dollars being printed, the average American feels broke. The money exists, but it's trapped in a massive clot at the top of the pyramid. And when the extremities, the small businesses and the families, stop receiving the blood of capital, they begin to wither and die. Here is your lesson. A system that prioritizes accumulation over circulation is a system that is committing suicide. You cannot have a functioning market if the customers have no blood left to give. When the clot becomes too large, the body goes into shock.
This isn't a theory. It is a mathematical certainty that has played out time and time again throughout human history. We are approaching the moment where the system can no longer sustain the pressure. We are approaching the heart attack of the global economy. But is this the first time this has happened? Or is this just the latest turn of a wheel that has been spinning for centuries? To understand our current danger, we have to look at the patterns of the past. We have to look at the Great Cycle.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. The Great Cycle isn't a theory. It is the heartbeat of the machine. It is the moment when the motion we talked about earlier hits the wall of scarcity. In 1929, the world learned what happens when a speculative bubble built on greed finally pops. Banks vanished, and a decade of darkness followed. In 2008, the monster returned, disguised as toxic mortgages. We were told it was a once-in-a-century event. But look around. The cycle is accelerating. Today, we aren't just facing a housing bubble or a stock market crash. We are facing the everything bubble. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $34 trillion. That is a number so large the human brain can barely process it. To put it in perspective, if you spent $1 every single second, it would take you over 1 million years to pay that back.
This isn't just debt. It is a mountain of unpayable promises, a tsunami of paper waiting to crash over the reality of our lives. Every time the system approaches a heart attack, the architects perform a bypass. They call it a bailout. They print more money, lower the interest rates, and kick the can down the road. But there is a catch. They aren't saving the house. They are just making the fire bigger for next time. The bailouts of the past decade didn't fix the blood clot. They just moved it. They protected the billionaires' portfolios while the cost of your groceries doubled. The system is now so addicted to cheap money that even a small rise in interest rates threatens to bring the entire cathedral down. Here is the lesson. The rebirth phase of the cycle always comes with a price, and that price is paid in the currency of your life. When the system resets, the people holding paper lose everything, while the people holding the invisible driver simply change the name of the currency and start the game again. We are standing at the edge of the greatest wealth transfer in human history. The music is slowing down. The chairs are being removed. Most people are still dancing, but you can hear the silence between the notes. The question is no longer, when will it happen? The question is, what do you do when the mask finally falls? To survive the collapse of the matrix, you need more than just awareness. You need a blueprint. You need the rules of the new world. Prepare yourself. It's time for the Decalogue of Survival. The realization that the game is rigged is the beginning of wisdom. But awareness without action is just a slower form of surrender. To exit the matrix, you don't need to overthrow the system.
You need to stop being its fuel. You need to reclaim your sovereignty. Here are the rules for the new world. This is the decalogue of survival. First, stop the bleeding. If debt is the alchemy that steals your time, you must cut the leash. Consumer debt is a voluntary shackle. Pay it off, close the accounts, and never trade your future hours for present-day vanities again. Second, understand the difference between currency and money. Dollars are currency. They are designed to melt. Money is a store of value. Stop saving in a medium that the Fed can dilute with a keystroke. Third, seek hard assets. If the big firms like BlackRock are buying up the physical world, they are telling you exactly what is valuable: land, energy, and essential resources.
Own things that the system cannot delete with a terms of service update.
Fourth, embrace self-sovereignty. Whether it's gold or Bitcoin, you need assets with no counterparty risk. If your wealth requires a bank's permission to access, it isn't yours. It's a loan they can recall at any time. Fifth, build your skill fortress. In an era of AI and automation, your only job security is being anti-fragile. Learn skills that are local, tangible, and indispensable. Sixth, disconnect from the circuses. Turn off the news, delete the dopamine loop apps, and stop being a spectator in your own life. Your attention is the most valuable commodity in the matrix. Stop giving it away for free. Seventh, build a tribe. The system isolates you to make you weak. Find people who see what you see. Local networks, parallel economies, and trusted communities are the only safety nets that won't fail when the great cycle resets. Here is the lesson. Freedom isn't the ability to choose your master.
It's the ability to live without one. Sovereignty is not about how much you have, but how little you are dependent on the machine. Most people will hear this and do nothing. They are too comfortable in their digital serfdom. But you are different. You've seen the invisible driver. You felt the weight of the blood clot. You know that the music is about to stop. The choice to exit is a solitary one. But once you step outside the loop, you realize that the walls of the matrix were always made of paper. It's time to take the wheel. It's time to become the master of your own motion. Welcome to the end of the illusion. Welcome to the invisible driver. We have traveled deep into the architecture of this system. We've unmasked the gravity of wealth, exposed the blood clots in our economy, and traced the invisible chains of debt that bind your time. But after all the data is analyzed and the history is decoded, one question remains. Who is sitting in the driver's seat of your life? Most people spend their entire existence as passengers. They sit in the back, staring at the screens we call the circuses, while the GPS is programmed by the Federal Reserve, the algorithms of big tech, and the institutional landlords who want to rent you your own freedom. They think they are moving forward, but they are simply being driven toward a destination they didn't choose. That is the invisible driver. It is the systemic force that moves the masses like a tide. But there is another kind of invisible driver. It is the version of you that refuses to be fuel for the machine. Look at the person who stops relying on the stimulus of the system and starts building their own fortress of skills and assets. That person is no longer a passenger. They have climbed into the front seat. They have taken the wheel. The world around them is still governed by scarcity and motion, but they are the ones choosing the direction of their travel. Here is the final lesson. Responsibility is the price of freedom. The system is comfortable because it removes the need to think,
but it pays you in the currency of your own soul. Stepping out of the loop is terrifying. It is lonely. It requires you to face the brutal geometry of survival without a safety net. But on the other side of that fear is the only reality that matters. The music is fading. The lights in the arena are flickering. The great cycle is turning once again. And this time, the reset will be unlike anything we've seen in our lifetimes. You can stay in the back seat and hope the architects have your best interests at heart. Or you can reach for the wheel. The choice was never about the system. The choice has always been about you. The road ahead is dark, and the maps they gave you are fake. But you are no longer blind. You see the mechanics, you hear the gears, and now you know the truth. Welcome to the invisible driver, where there are truths that society doesn't want you to know.